Hi, and thank you for watching The People's Perspective in News. My name is Desmond Taylor, and I'm here with Liane Moonraven, who is a writer and filmmaker. Liane, say hi.
Hello.
Now, I want to mind you that Liane can't see what's going on. We're having some video problems, but we can see her perfectly. She's here today to talk about domestic violence. Domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and or other abusive behaviors as part of a systematic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one intimate partner against another. It includes physical violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, and emotional abuse. Liane, what do you see and what really sticks out to you about domestic violence?
Well, I think the most important point to communicate to people is exactly what domestic violence is, because most people, when you use the term domestic violence, they imagine someone getting beaten up, physically abused by somebody. But domestic violence itself covers several different types of abuse. So really, it should be titled domestic violence and abuse, because it's not always physical violence. It's mental, physical, emotional, sexual, and financial abuse is a big one. And now they've even included something called spiritual abuse. So it covers all types of abuse and violence between intimate partners.
Okay, and you bring up a good point that when people think of domestic violence, they think of assault. The building blocks are really the other types of abuses that you named: the spiritual, the monetary, the basically what would be considered harassment if you weren't in a relationship. What are the telltale signs that you are in a abusive relationship?
Well, normally abusers are very seasoned at what they do. And so, and also I want to throw out there that anybody from any demographic, any walk of life, any socioeconomic level, any type of background can fall to being a victim of domestic abuse. It has no particular face, no particular sex or race, color, ethnicity. Anybody can find themselves in a domestic abusive relationship. So I want to start off with that as well. But some of the telltale signs are abusers are very smart usually, typically very intelligent people, and they know how to pick their victims. It could be somebody who is going through something traumatic or has gone through something traumatic. It could be somebody with little or no self-esteem or self-worth or self-value. And it could be just being caught, on a bad day, because they know what to look for. And typically you can start off in a very loving and caring relationship and then find yourself in a domestic abusive relationship as well. But I would say some of the telltale signs are usually control. That's how it starts. Control and separation are the two major warning signs. If you find yourself in a situation with a domestic partner, and when I say domestic partner, you don't have to be living together. You can be in a relationship. So, but there usually has been intimacy involved, or pressure to be intimate with this particular person. And it could be male or female, because men do get violated as well. And we'll talk about that later when we cover some statistics. But usually control. When you notice your partners start to have a lot to say about what you wear, where you go, who you hang out with, how you speak, how things that you do on a normal daily basis that are a part of you and that were never a problem before suddenly become a problem. If it's a male abuser, he will often start off systematically separating you from your family. Oh, I think your friends don't like me, or no, I won't go because I don't want to be a third wheel. And then you find yourself um, not hanging out with your friends because you don't want him to feel bad. It's all part of isolation. And then control. Very subtly in the beginning, don't you think that skirt is a little too short? Or you sure you want to wear your hair like that? Or, I really like your hair longer than shorter. Please don't get it cut. I really like it long. So it's like it can be really subtle in the beginning, and then it escalates. And then before you know it, like I said, it doesn't matter who you are. Before you know it, you find yourself, oh, wow, how did I get here?
Okay, so where can you tell someone that you can find the definite separation between someone's opinion and someone trying to control them because they're most likely going to be an abuser?
Well, see, that's the thing about opinions. First of all, if you have an opinion, doesn't mean you have to give it, right? And it also, the difference between an opinion doesn't usually start off to make you feel uncomfortable, to make you feel inadequate, or make you feel like you need to do something to change yourself to make somebody else happy. So that's the difference between somebody controlling and somebody's opinion. Because if you don't ask his opinion, but he offers it anyway, that could be a warning sign, or when you ask for his opinion, if you find it, it's always, and I say him because I'm a female, so, like I said, men get abused too, so please interchange him and her where appropriate. But, if you're going out somewhere and you're with your partner, and you don't ask him, but he offers information on, oh, that dress sure is short, you're going to have the attention of all the men at the party. That's a subliminal message. That's very overt in making you feel inadequate about what you're wearing. That it's your fault if other men pay attention to you because of what you're wearing. So it really depends on the wording, the phrasing, how often it happens, and how it makes you feel after it's said. It could be a situation of, well, I really liked you better with short hair, or I really liked you better before you locked your hair, that type of thing. Anything to make you feel inadequate about yourself is constantly chipping away at that self-esteem, and that's what they do.
So at what point of your self-esteem should you, as the abusee, feel that this is the time to go?
Well, see, that's the thing. If you're suffering from low self-esteem, accompanying that is usually depression and, lack of sleep and low self-worth, low self-value. So you may not be able to. The only way usually to avoid domestic violence and abuse is preemptive strikes and educating yourself to the warning signs. Because let me just throw a couple of statistics out there. So like every minute, that's every 60 seconds, 20 people in the United States are physically abused by an intimate partner. 20 people per minute. So in 1 year, 10 million women and men, 10 million in the United States, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been a victim of some type of physical violence by an intimate partner over the course of their entire lifetime. So we're talking about a lot of people. And we're talking about people who find themselves in this situation usually when it's too late. A lot of times somebody will get smacked or pushed or shoved, and the abuser will say, oh my God, what did I do? I'm so sorry. It will never happen again. And they want to believe that. And so they don't leave. They stay and give that person a second chance. And then the abuser knows that they got away with it the first time. And so they will do it again, most likely. Not always, because some people do make a mistake. Let me throw that out there. Some people do make a mistake. And it's totally up to the individual of whether they want to give that person a second chance or not. But more than likely, if they hit you once, they will hit you again. But not always. So if you've got low self-esteem and you're depressed and you're going through changes and you're desperate and you love this person because they make sure they get you wrapped in. They make sure they get you in real good. It's not that easy to walk away. And then, we're talking about if you've moved in with somebody, how do you move out and financial situations. And then, we'll talk more about that financial abuse because that is a really, really, really tough one right there because a lot of people will say, well, why don't you just leave? Well, you can't always do that. You can't just always pick up and go, especially if the abuser is the one controlling the money, the finances.
Okay, well, let's talk about the financial abuse. Um, we live in a society where it seems like men usually make more statistically. That has been proven even for the same job. And then a lot of the times women carry different jobs that make less money. So, and what it sounds like you're explaining is men have the power when it comes to economics within the family, which hinders a woman from making her own choices to be able to leave. Is that
Right.
true?
Yeah, well, women between the ages of 18 and 24 are most commonly abused by their partners. So there's that window there between 18 and 24 where most women find themselves the most vulnerable. And I mean, look at that age group. That's right when you get out of high school, right when you're in college, right when you are getting out of college and starting out. And that's where most of us find ourselves in our first relationships is, right at the end of high school and in college. So you're at a vulnerable age. And that's also the end of the adolescent period where you are just now getting through puberty really well and adolescence and starting into young adulthood. So it's a very vulnerable time to begin with. So, and most of us are not financially established um, during that age period either. So if you're in a domestic situation and you aren't making that much money and you are living with your partner and you are relying on their financial support to help you, that's when it becomes a real problem. I personally have been involved in abusive relationships, not never physically, but definitely financial abuse, and it can happen so easily that you're not even aware. So, like in my case, I had come out of the workforce to raise our daughter. It actually was cheaper for me to come out of work than to pay daycare. One of the salaries literally would have been going to commuting back and forth to work and paying childcare. That was an immediate opportunity to make me vulnerable, an independent woman who was used to making her own way her whole life. I'm now suddenly dependent on somebody for money for toilet paper and toothpaste. And, when you have to actually go to somebody and ask them for money just for your basic needs, I mean, even feminine products, you've got to ask for money if you're not working outside of the home or if you've lost your job or, it's very easy to find yourself in that situation. And what that does is give somebody tremendous power over you, tremendous power.
Okay, and let's bring it to the workplace. I read a statistic, and I'm going to read it right now. Between 2003 and 2008, 142 women were murdered in the workplace by their abusers. 78% of women killed in the workplace were killed during, or 78% of women killed in the workplace during that time frame. So 78% of all women killed in the workplace were from their abuser. But we get into stalking and calling the workplace all the time and creating problems in the workplace that may make them lose their job or make them perform, whether it's a man or a woman, incorrectly. How do you see that, or what do you know about that?
Well, all I can say in regard to that is that there's still a stigma attached to domestic violence. And because there is violence involved, I mean, let's face it, even police officers go in pairs to domestic calls because they're more likely to get in trouble and get hurt. When I say get in trouble, I mean physical trouble of getting into a fight, or God forbid having to shoot somebody, or them getting shot, on a domestic call than pretty much any other call. And they always go in pairs. They never ever go to a domestic call by themselves. So if you've got police officers taking that type of precaution in dealing with domestic disputes, imagine how people that are just average people are hesitant to get involved if there is a problem. So if a woman goes to work complaining about, the stalking, and, the employees or the employer can see the abuser stalking her, like hanging out in the parking lot, calling the job, repeatedly trying to get in touch with her, it's easier to fire her than it is to deal with the problem. So, and it's safer. That's the bottom line. It's safer to let her go than to deal with the problem. And, there are domestic violence laws. There are stalking laws. There are tough sentences for domestic abuse. But that's usually after the fact. It's usually after the person has perpetrated violence or even homicide against the victim. So, like, just on a typical day, a normal average day, the domestic violence hotlines across the country receive 20,000 calls a day. 20,000 calls a day. There's no way to stay on top of that number.
There isn't. That's actually a shocking number. And then I read 19.3 million women and 5.1 million men in the United States have been stalked in their lifetime. 60.8% of female victims and 43.5 men reported being stalked by a current or former intimate partner. So it's not just the partners that you're with currently. Domestic abuse can come from previous relationships as well, and that's something that I really didn't know, even though I looked at these statistics before.
Well, I'm going to give you an example of that, and she has told me before. I won't mention her name, but she has told me I can use her story anytime. But before I do that, I just want to add to your statistics. 19% of domestic violence involves a weapon. 19%. So, yeah, that's enough reason for people not to get involved. But I have a girlfriend who she got involved with her partner, her husband, when they were very young. Excuse me for a minute. Sorry. She got involved with her partner when they were very young, I think around 16. And her relationship with him was just peppered with incidents of domestic violence, and they both did. She did things to him and he did things to her, back and forth, blah 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 blah, for 30 years off and on. This just went on literally for 30 years. And finally, and there was extramarital affairs, which causes a lot of instances for domestic violence, is the reason for a lot of domestic violence is extramarital affairs. But they both did on both sides. And finally, like after 30 years, they finally separated and divorced. Well, he still, even after the divorce, for a time, they would still hook up, if you know what I mean. They would still get together. And he was living with someone else at this point, but they would still hook up. And today, they have been divorced now for 10 years. And he still stalks her. At any given time, she can look out the window and he's in the parking lot.
Wow.
She's had her car egged before, and he will never go away. He will never ever go away. He just won't. She has told him that she doesn't want to have anything to do with him. She has threatened him legally, and this woman works for a judge. So it's not even like, she's working at Starbucks. She works for a judge in the district courthouse of where she lives, and he still stalks her. She works for a judge, and he still stalks her. She will look out the window and see his car driving through the neighborhood. He will call her repeatedly and say, I really think we should get back together. And they've been divorced now for 10 years. So It never goes away. Never.
I was going to read some statistics, but that story kind of took my breath away. Is
Yeah.
this a mental illness?
Um. Well, it could be. I mean, the abuser might have some mental issues. I mean, that, do mental issues exacerbate domestic abuse? Absolutely. It's because domestic victimization is always correlated with depression and suicidal behavior, and that's why you have so many murder suicides related to domestic violence. It's because, the person could be suicidal, or if I can't have you, then nobody will have you, and if I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to take you with me. That type of thing. A lot of women, that's why women kill their own children, is because in their sick minds, they are suicidal actually, and they actually are doing in their minds what's best for their children by killing their kids, so the kids won't be either stigmatized by the suicide or left behind to raise themselves without their mother. But that's a whole other show. That's
Okay.
a whole other show. But so yeah, it really depends on the mental illness, but it certainly definitely plays a part in it. Yeah. But also, if you're depressed and suicidal, that makes you at a higher risk for being a victim. Also, it could go either way.
So the abuser can have the same problems as the abusee.
Well, yeah, and that's because most abusers, statistically, I have that number somewhere if you give me a second. But statistically speaking, most people who grow up to be abusers were abused in their childhood. Let me give some more statistics. This one I found absolutely shocking. Listen to this, Desmond. The number of American troops killed in Afghanistan and Iraq between 2001 and 2012, which is 11 years, right, was 6,488. So we say 6,500, right? So between 2001 and 2012, the number of American troops killed in Afghanistan and Iraq was 6,500. The number of American women, and we're just talking about in America, who were murdered by a current or ex-male partner during that exact same time was 11,766, almost 12,000.
That's almost doubling. Wow.
Almost double, yeah.
Whew. That's
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
Yeah. These numbers are hard to fathom. I was getting most of my statistics from NCADV, which is the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And
I'm glad you brought that up too, because let me tell you, if you go to that website, and I don't know if it happened to you, but it's happened to me 3 times that I've gone to that particular website to get statistics, and that again, that's the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. That page is riddled with a virus. Every time I go to the page, I pick up a virus. So what does that tell you?
that tells me to close my tablet.
Yeah, but what else does it tell you?
Someone's doing someone doesn't want that information out there.
Exactly. I just throwing that warning out there. There are other places to go to get statistics, but I just thought that was very ironic that every time I go there to get statistics, I pick up a virus.
Where are some other places that people can go to find out statistics?
Well, you know what? If you just go on to Google and you type in domestic violence statistics, you can go to the American Psychological Association, excuse me. You can go to, let's see, what's another one that I know off the top of my head? Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they have statistics. The World Health Organization has statistics. That'll get you started. And they overlap. So if you find a really good one, they're going to have the same things.
Okay. Now, we are talking about domestic abuse and domestic violence, and we're talking about it in an Americanized way. But when we look at other countries, some of that is actually their cultural norms. When people migrate to this country, does that influence the numbers, or is America doing bad all on its own?
These are Americans. A woman in America is beaten every 9 seconds
That's
in this country,
and
and
that's
those are recorded Americans.
yes, because crimes like this often go unreported, and then the
Right.
longevity of the crime is years. You have a friend that's been going through a form of domestic violence for more than 40 years at bare minimum.
Well, um, between 40 and 45% of women, and I'm not talking about men, just women, 40 to 45% of women in physically abusive relationships were raped or assaulted during the relationship.
Let's
And I specifically know in her case that she was definitely a victim of marital rape. Um, and she was, because they were together for many years, and then she married him, so she was being abused before she even married him. And that's because a lot of times people think that marriage will solve problems when actually it makes it worse, because in their mind you become their property at that point, so they have even less respect for you when you get married. So but a lot of women are under the misnomer of, well, if we get married, if things will be better. No, sweetheart, it will be worse. Yeah, I guarantee you. If it's bad before you get married, it will be worse. But before we go any further, I did have a statistic that you were talking about the workplace. I just wanted to throw this one out. The number of days of paid work that women lose every year because of the abuse perpetrated against them by a current or former male partner is 8 million.
yes,
And the loss is the equivalent to over 32,000 full-time jobs. So every year, this is a year, just 365 days, 32,000 full-time jobs are lost because of domestic violence. 8 million days. So, it goes back to what I said. It's easier to let the woman go than to deal with the domestic violence situation. I mean, I've heard horrific stories where women have been at work, and this was right around in the area where I live. She was at work, I think at a Radio Shack or something, and it happened so quickly. The man just walked in, doused her with gasoline, and lit her on fire. And that has happened all across America frequently. So, yeah, people don't want to get caught up in that. They let it go. Well, you know what? That's your personal business. You can't bring it on the job. But women who are escaping the home where an abuser is, where's the safest place that they feel that they can go is work. They can't go to their families because their families are usually scared. And I also want to point out that abusers are more likely to pick on women who are separated from their families, either not in the same state, or women who don't have brothers, sisters, uncles, fathers, that type of thing, because the abuser figures he's more likely to get away with the abuse.
And you also mentioned that towards the beginning of the show that these abusers separate these people from their loved ones anyway. So if they can't find one that already isn't isolated, their goal is to create isolation anyway.
Right. Well, I don't think your mother likes me, so I'm not going to go to Thanksgiving dinner. And, your sister is such a bitch. And, that's how it starts. So if he doesn't go to Thanksgiving dinner, well, guess what? You're not going to go without him, or you're going to go and feel so incredibly guilty that you're not going to have a good time. And then it'll be the same thing at Christmas. And then it'll be, well, if you love me, you won't go. If you're going to have to make a choice. It's either your family or me. This is the kind of stuff that happens, and it starts off very slowly, and then it escalates to that. Well, if you really love me, you're going to have to make a choice between me or your family. Well, I can't choose between you and my family, or you're going to have to, because if you don't choose between us, I'm walking. And because she doesn't want to lose her relationship for whatever reasons, now there are some women out there that'll say, "Screw you, buddy, deuces." But more than likely, the woman or the man is going to feel badly. And then let's talk about men for a minute. Men find themselves in abusive situations, and it's horrific. And it's usually men who were raised to never hit women under any circumstances. Just walk away, take it like a man. Boys aren't supposed to have emotions, and you're supposed to be a tough guy, macho, and they end up getting their asses kicked by women who hit on them knowing that they're not going to hit them back. And it's awful. It's absolutely awful. And men have self-esteem issues, but they're raised not to show any type of weakness or emotion. So they're not going to deal with it. And there are men who love their partner so much that they're going to stick with her. She's just having a bad day, or she's got her period, or she's menopausal, whatever. They make excuses for the abuse as well.
And let's take a second to talk about how society would treat a male victim.
Uh, yeah.
We can go from telling your buddy, which most men would not do, to calling the police. Most of the time in stories that I hear, no matter what, it's the man that's getting shipped out by the police. He's the person that's getting arrested, even if he was the victim. So what do you see when we talk about how society treats the male victim?
Well, let's look at how society treats boys. And I do say boys because I mean when they are boys. They aren't supposed to cry. Oh, you're a fag if you cry. First of all, that's shaming homosexuals, and it's also shaming emotions in boys. And they grow up that way, thinking that if they show any type of emotion or any kind of complaint, especially from a girl, that somehow reflects their masculinity. And it's horrific. It's how we raise men in our society. So it needs to start there. First of all, is nurturing boys in how to deal with their emotions. And again, abuse is usually handed down. So if this young man, and it's also directly related into single parents, I totally lost what I was going to say. I totally forgot what I was going to say. If you start off letting boys know that it's okay to display emotions. Oh, I know what I was going to say. If a young boy is raised in a domestic violence home where the father is beating the mother and the sisters or whatever, he has a choice. He can either perpetuate that type of behavior or he can never become that way. And we don't know which way that's going to go. Really, we just don't. Yeah, unless somebody steps in and intervenes.
And it's hard for them to even determine. It's not really a choice at that point when you grow up with it. It's reenacting what you see.
Well, and recently here, again in the news, 2 little boys were murdered recently by it wasn't even her husband, it was her boyfriend. The boyfriend was beating the mother, and the little boy was 8 years old, went to defend his mother, and he got killed. So it's tragic. It's just tragic.
When children are in we'll call it a relationship or the family, and they do try to defend the person that is getting abused, better yet, how does this impact a child's studies academically?
Well, I am a college professor, and I can usually, just in dealing with my students, know where there's trouble. There's usually a lack of concentration. There's usually missed classes, and those are the students that I reach out to the most, particularly the female students. I try to really build a level of trust, which, I mean, I have a short time in just 14 weeks in a semester, but I let them know from the beginning. One of the movies that I show in every one of my classes is The Burning Bed. It's a very good movie, and it deals with horrific domestic violence. It's a true story where a woman suffered horrific domestic violence from her husband, and then she, one night, while he was asleep, passed out drunk, she lit his bed on fire, literally set him on fire. And Francine Hughes was her name, and it was because of that case, not guilty by reason of insanity became a very viable defense in domestic abuse. But anyway, so I show this movie, and it's a way to open the door of communication between me and my students to let them know that they are safe to come to me as a mandatory reporter to talk about any situations that they feel themselves in that they're being abused. And it's important, I think, for us as educators to create that level of trust between our students, because they might not have any other opportunity or any other person that they can talk to, particularly if they're in a really bad situation where the partner is controlling their cell phone use, or they're constantly around, they've separated them from their family. We as educators may be the only line of defense that they have. So they need to be able to come to us and know that they'll be safe. So if I see this pattern of behavior between any particular student, I will often dedicate an entire class to domestic violence. I've had students come up to me afterwards and say, "Thank you so much for doing that. I am in a situation. The reason why I couldn't get to class is because he owns the car. He won't bring me to school. He won't, he'll tell me he's going to take me to class, or if I have the car, I have to get it home when he knows I have to be in class, and if he won't bring me." So when you create that level of trust and open the door, you will be just amazed at who comes through and opens up and tells you their story. So these women and men are suffering in silence because it's still a stigma. It's still ostracization. It's a tough word for me. When they come out and tell people that they're being abused, because they feel weak, they feel ashamed, and it's because they've been made to feel ashamed.
Okay, as an outsider looking in, you deal with maybe more people than I do in a level of teaching them or having opportunity to impact them to come forward about their abuse. As just a regular person, what are some telltale signs that I could use to see, or anyone can use to see, that someone is being abused? Because I've heard that often abusers are good at hiding their patterns, that leave marks where you can't see and stuff like that. So how do you really know?
Well, you don't. And I mean, domestic abuse, whether it's sexual, physical, emotional, mental, financial, the only one that's going to leave outward scars is the physical abuse. The other ones, you're not going to know. The only thing you can do is through observation. If someone is really depressed, really withdrawn, someone who doesn't want to go home, somebody who's in a relationship and is talking about their partner, you can pick up at least an idea of maybe what's going on. But then you won't always. There's just no way to know without them, having a little more intimate conversations. But again, the telltale signs are if they're with somebody who is controlling them, and you recognize that, but they don't. They make excuses. Victims make excuses after excuse for their abuser. Oh, he just had a bad day. Oh, he just got laid off his job. Oh, he just got into an argument with his brother. Any excuse, his car broke down. Any old excuse to excuse the ignorant behavior of an abuser. But most importantly, I would say, don't ever put yourself in danger. Don't ever do it, because you will find yourself in danger if you just bull in a china shop, put yourself in the middle of it.
Okay, because these abusers are dangerous. Like you said, two police officers will show up at a time.
Right.
People will get rid of the employee before they try to tackle the situation head on. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously these people are dangerous. I want to get back to something that we started to talk about, but we didn't necessarily finish, and it's the legal aspect of males being abused. What can you tell me about males in the court system when it comes to abuse?
What do you mean?
Um, like I said earlier, often even if the male was the person who was abused, the police officer will take away the male. When Go ahead.
No, let me correct you on that.
Okay.
They don't take away. Well, see, back in the day, and again, going back to that Francine Hughes, she reported the abuse to the police, but oftentimes what happened, well, not oftentimes, what would happen was, before the laws that we have today, if the police didn't actually see the abuse occurring, they wouldn't arrest anybody. They would send the husband, I'll just use the husband, they would send him off to a friend's house to cool off. Well, if there's alcohol involved, or if he's going to his buddy's house, guess what? He's going to drink some more, you know. But if they didn't see it, there was nothing they would do. Well, fortunately, today, the laws have changed completely. If you call the police on a domestic call, somebody's getting locked up. And it's not always the man. It's not always the man. If they see any form of abuse at all, somebody is going away. And if it's her or if it's him, and a lot of times it's the woman. So, and even if he was yelling at you or, you know, cursing you to the devil and calling you everything but a child of God, if you hit him first, you're the one who's going to be arrested. They are not playing anymore. That's it. Now you probably, you know, get released that night or the next day, but somebody's going if the cops get called out. I did find a statistic though about when we were talking about my friend about women who were being stalked. It's 81%. 81% of women who are stalked by a current or former male partner who are also physically abused by that partner is 81%. And it does say former in that.
Okay, and
that's 81%. I mean, God, that's so high.
That's most. That's It's not almost half. It's not a little more than half. It's most. It's lacking 20%. It's the norm. It's sickening and disgusting.
Yeah, and it's 70%. 70, let me give you a couple more statistics. 70% of women worldwide, now this is worldwide, but 70% will experience physical or sexual abuse by an intimate partner during their lifetime. 70%. And then 98% of financial abuse occurs in all domestic violence cases. 98%. The number one reason domestic violence survivors stay or return to the abusive relationship is because the abuser controls their money supply, leaving them with no financial resources to break free, which is basically what I said. But 98%, that's all of them.
Yes, that's all of them.
So don't ever say to a domestic violence victim, why don't you just leave? Just leave. Don't ever say that to them, ever. Never.
Because it's just not possible. And the way we like to sugarcoat things on the outside is easy to say something like that. But if you look deeply into the situation with the statistics that you're explaining, it's not that easy, and it will never be that easy.
Right.
Now, there's a oxymoron term that I'm going to make up. Hey, maybe someone already coined it, but I want to see what you think about it. Consensual rape. Where
consensual rape?
Yes, it's not really consensual rape, but a woman may agree to sex by psychological force. So she might say yes, but she also feels that she will suffer physical abuse if she does not have sexual relations with her partner.
Like marital rape, yes.
Okay, so it's just marital rape?
I wouldn't substitute the term, but yeah, it's very similar to marital rape, yes.
Okay, and is that something that is a higher occurrence in domestic abuse?
Well, most married women, first of all, wouldn't consider it rape, and secondly, they wouldn't admit to it. So it's a really hard number to harness. I mean, how do you even calculate a number like that? How do you get people to come forward and even admit that when they don't even admit domestic violence? They're certainly not going to admit marital rape. But yes, there's millions and millions and millions of people who have sex with their husbands or wives, and they don't want to. It's not consensual. And how many women acquiesce to having sex so that he doesn't explode? It's yeah, there's no way to even harness that number.
Okay, but it does. Well, I think you said it in one term or another that it does happen a lot. It,
Oh yeah.
okay, and that's something that I was curious about because I remember being in the military and they had something in that fashion of like if a commander was having relations with a lower soldier and they were to break up or something like that. Well, first of all, it's fraternization is not allowed, but it would be considered. I'm not sure what form of sexual assault, but let's say it's like, all right, you're going to be on the front of the convoy now. You don't want to have sex with me. You're going to be on the front of the convoy because the front of the convoy is most likely to receive that IED.
Hmm.
So it's kind of in the same parallel, maybe not exact, but that's where I got that example from. Um,
Well, let me give you a non-military example. So you've got a domestic abuser. He smacks his wife around, and he drinks. So one night he's particularly drunk, and we all know that drunks are a lot more amorous. When they have alcohol flowing through their veins. So this particular night, he wants to have sex, and he's drunk, and she doesn't want to. First of all, he's disgusting. He's drunk. He smells. He's just nasty. She doesn't love him anymore, and she doesn't want to have sex with him, and he's manhandling her and pushing her around and saying, I want some, give it to me now. And she's saying no. She is saying no, and he slaps her, and then she acquiesces and has sex with him because she doesn't want to be beaten. Which is worse, having sex with him or being beaten? Some women have to face that decision every single day: having sex or being beaten.
and that's a hard decision to make. I've never been put
It's
in that position.
awful.
Yeah, I've never been put in that position, so I couldn't really speak on it. It has to be awful, and it almost seems like the woman is going to choose to have sex because there is there is no physical reminder. There is no way
Yeah.
to tell the people. There's no way to find out from the outside, and it seems as if a lot of abusers want to hide it from the outside.
Yeah, and one final thing, that I'd like to talk about, taking that one step further. A lot of people are like, well, why do you keep having babies by this man if he's abusing you? And that sort of, in their minds, invalidates the fact that she's actually being abused. But let's talk about that for a minute. She's being abused, but there's also honeymoon periods in between the abuse where he all of a sudden, oh, I've seen the error of my ways. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to stop beating you. And he does for 3 months, 6 weeks, however long. Things do get better. And she falls back into that I'm in love with him stage because he's gotten better. He's done all of this for me. He can be trusted again. But he's controlled her in that she better not be taking birth control. He's checking her underwear. He's checking her body parts. He's doing everything that he can to make sure that he impregnates her. And why? Because that's still a form of control. If she's strapped down with his kids, she can't be out there dating and in his own mind, being attractive to other men. So you can't even really look at it as that being her fault. Because there are patterns. It's not necessarily always violent. That's why it's domestic violence and abuse. There could be just the abuse period where they're getting along and he's doing what he's supposed to do, but it doesn't last, and it's a pattern over and over and over. And in between the violence outbursts, oh, here comes another baby. So it does happen.
Okay, there is the Violence Against Women's Act, which is a federal level um, law against domestic abuse, and then a lot of things are handled on the state level. Where is the gap that legally harms these victims? Is there some kind of flaw within the legal ramifications that actually harms these victims? Like they need too much. They need three strikes rule or something like that. Is there something out there that actually the law is hindering helping the victims that you know
Well,
of?
I'm not a lawyer, Desmond, so I don't know. To that extent, I don't know the law. So, I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to know within your research or within like your general knowledge if you knew that there was something out there that was stopping them legally because maybe they need proof, maybe they need to have those harassing calls, maybe they need so much evidence to make it legal because there's things like the PFA and the emergency PFA.
I just think that it's more of people being afraid to come forward because, in a lot of cases, the family of the abuser, and this is really important, the family of the abuser, now he separated her from her family, and his family will protect him at all costs. So not only is she being victimized by him, she's also being victimized by his entire family. The mother's making excuses for him. Well, what did you do to piss him off? You obviously did something. So she's getting it from all sides. So it could be just a matter of, how do you fight that? How do you fight it? Because, and the final statistic I'll give is the domestic violence itself is the third leading cause of homelessness among families. The third leading cause of homelessness is domestic violence. So, she's faced with being put out on the street with her kids, living in a shelter, which can, in many cases, be worse than where she is. And then, depending on who the abused woman is, maybe she's a pillar in her community. Maybe she's a powerful businesswoman. Maybe she's this, maybe she's that. And she just cannot afford the devastation of outing her abuser. You just don't know what the circumstances are.
That's very true. And we'll finish this up by talking about hindering and help. Um, Obviously, to hinder this, you can educate yourself on the signs and pay close attention no matter what side of the relationship you're on, whether you're the male or the female. And there are the hotlines and there are the shelters and there is the emergency, the 911 that you can call and the PFAs. Is there anything that I missed that can either help or hinder these situations to bring the numbers down?
I would say the way to bring the numbers down dramatically is early prevention. When you are involved with someone, to really, really know your stuff and don't go the love is blind route. Do not make excuses for behavior in the beginning of the relationship. Always be on the lookout, always be discerning, always pay attention. Does this person have a potential for abuse? And again, it's not always physical abuse. It's emotional, it's mental. Where are they in their lives? How do they treat the relationships in their lives? Do they get along with their mother? Do they get along with their family? How does he talk about his family? How do they interact at family gatherings? Does he drink? Does he do drugs? How is his work performance? I mean, it's you really owe it to yourself to really put somebody through this process. And a lot of times we lead with our hearts and we find ourselves in these situations and it's too late. It's already an emotional investment and it's hard to get out of. But even if you find yourself in a situation before it's too late, reach out. And I would highly suggest the hotlines, but I would also suggest faculty. I would definitely find mandatory reporters. I would say the church, and I don't want to get hate mail and all this kind of stuff. I would say reach out to clergy, but clergy have a tendency to involve the other partner and want to put you through marital counseling and try to get to the root of the problem, which could put the victim in more danger. So that's the only reason why I wouldn't recommend that. But people know their church and they know their clergy better than I do. But I just know that they generally want to keep the family together instead of finding ways to get her out. Church is more focused on keeping the family together, and they shouldn't necessarily be together.
I gotta say that I respect the fact that you open doors to conversations, personal conversations with your students to talk about domestic abuse if they're in those situations. Do you think it would help to mandate this into educational curriculum?
Well, educators on most levels that I personally know of, and again, I don't know if this is up to each individual state or if it's nationwide, I have no idea. But as an educator in my state, I am a mandated reporter. I sign paperwork when I'm hired by a college that if I suspect any type of abuse that's going on, I am mandated by my state to report it. I don't have to prove it. I'm just mandated to report it, and then an investigation will occur. So if I don't report it ethically, morally, and legally, I am liable for that, because if something happens to my student and for some reason, if she's murdered or he's murdered, and the police come and ask me, were there any signs at all? If I sit there and say yes, they will look at me and say, well, why didn't you report it?
Okay, that's very good to know. You're watching the People's Perspective in News. You can always see all of our material on www.peoplesperspectivenews.com. This is Liane Moonraven. She is a writer, a filmmaker, and an educator, and she is an advocate to get away domestic abuse and violence because there is a big difference between the two, and there is a stigma out there that are leaving people in harm. Liane, take it away. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Desmond, thank you so much. This is a cause that is very, very close and dear to my heart. And thank you for having me to talk about it. And I'm always out there trying to do my best to bring attention and awareness to young people and even people that are older, just more awareness in how to deal with it.